Welcome to Chapter 17 of Motor Development and Skill Learning. Let's get the slides going. Hopefully. All right. It's probably the fastest this computer's worked all month. Sweet. So motor learning defined. Motor learning is relatively permanent gains in motor skill capability associated with practice and experience. Motor skill capability changes with the following: effective practice and experience with related activities. And developmental motor learning focuses on how individuals might learn differently across the lifespan. So, for instance, probably this is one that may resonate with most everybody. I've only met a few adults that can't ride a bike, right? But it's a motor skill that you can learn at a young age. You may ride bikes through your youth. You may spend many years not riding a bike, and then you get on a bike again, and they always say, oh yeah, you always remember how to ride a bike, right? Or the phrase is, oh, it's like riding a bike, right? Because your body remembers how to do it. It's one of those things that once you've done it, you've done enough times and you've had enough experience, it clicks, right? And there's a lot of things that are like that. For instance, you may play an instrument, right? And you've played instrument for years and years and years, and you may go a month or several months without playing it. And again, you're like, there may be certain songs you play all the time. Like for me, for instance, I play guitar, and I can go a long time, like sometimes even years without playing a certain song. But once I hear it in my head, I can pick up the guitar, and my brain and hands just know what to do, right? It's a motor skill that I've learned, and I had enough effective practice and experience doing it that it remembers, right? And then there are some things that are um, experienced with related activities, right? So you may learn a new skill that's similar to an old skill, right? So you could look at it like things are very, very similar. So say you play basketball, you learn how to shoot a basket and everything. And then, say the first time somebody has a trash can, they're like, hey, take this piece of trash and shoot it over in the trash can. Now, again, very similar. The wadded up paper, whatever it is not a basketball. The trash can is not a basket, but it's a similar concept. Or it may be the difference between, like, if you've ever been skateboarding and snowboarding or surfing and things, there's some crossover in those. And if you've done enough effective practice and you're good at one of them, typically I find folks that are really good. I feel skateboarding is the most difficult out of the three. That's me personally. And again, the reason I say that is because that's when I have the most difficulty out of the three. And again, it's the one that where I've had friends that are really good skateboarders, and I've taken them to go snowboarding for the first time or surfing for the first time. I feel they just learn faster, and they pick it up quicker. Um, and so again, there's certain things that have some like similar crossover capabilities, right? Um, so motor learning is studied by giving by giving study participants a period of time to learn and acquire skill, rest, retention test, or transfer test. Now, here's one of the things where we're going to cross over into something else, and this is why I have an issue with this something else I'm about to talk about. Is we do these functional skill assessments. I want to say they're functional skill assessments because that's what they are, but we call them functional mobility tests, right? So you'll see things like the overhead squat and all these other things that we look at functional testing. And again, we use these as assessments to see if somebody is like not flexible or not strong enough, or a combination of those things, basically. So again, like I say, overhead squat's a difficult, it's a difficult thing to master, okay? And so when we use that as a functional assessment, a lot of people, there's little cues that you watch when they do it. And if they do certain things, it'll say, oh yeah, they're too tight across the posterior chain around the, hamstrings, glutes, and things like that. They don't have enough shoulder mobility. So there's all these detriments that we attribute with certain movements. Now, again, the one thing they don't take into consideration is it's a difficult skill to acquire. And if you give somebody enough of a period of time to learn and acquire that skill, you give them some rest, you have them do some retention tests, and they do it several times, you may find that these detriments will diminish, and it's not because their body's becoming more mobile. It's not because their muscles are becoming necessarily stronger, because again, you'd spend the time within like an hour process and take somebody from like when they first walk in till when they leave in an hour and give them enough rest periods in between so you don't exhaust them, and they may become a very proficient overhead squatter. Okay, and the reason I say that is because they don't think about the motor learning involved. And again, we use this test with very minimal instruction on how to perform it, one. And two, we use this test with new lifters all the time in functional training scenarios. Because again, we're looking for these people's body movement deficits and attributing it to muscle, tendon, and ligament deficiencies, not to do they know how to do the movement deficiencies, right? And so again, you know, for instance, I know I don't have mobility in my left shoulder after 3 surgeries that is adequate. Now I have enough mobility to do a perfect overhead squat. I'm not that flexible, but I've done so many overhead squats, I can do that skill because the motor learning involved in doing it, I've done it so many times, I can do it really, really well. And somebody will watch me do it and be like, all right, you don't have any of these other problems. Well, actually, I do have some of those problems that are in there, but I can overhead squat, right? Where if you use goniometer assessments and you know individual strength test on each joint movement, you would find which things that I am actually you know, like I would be proficient at based on the fact that my muscles and tendons and ligaments and my range of motion and strength and all that stuff is there, and which things I am not. But again, when you use complex movements, there's other things that may be at play rather than actually having a functional mobility issue. And so you've got to be aware of that. And again, this is why motor learning is so important to understand, because it does, you will find that sometimes there's a contradiction in modes of science that we use. And we're so focused on this and we don't even think about that. And again, this is a good example of that, okay? The learning that has occurred is established by retention test performance similar to that at the end of an acquisition, or transfer test performance more advanced than learning a new skill, right? So sometimes, like I said, you can take one skill and transfer it to another. So again, if you can ride a bicycle and then you hop on a motorcycle, now that again you're not pedaling or anything like that and it's self-propelled, but once you learn how to do, you know, how to shift and use the throttle and all those things, you can learn to ride the bike much faster than somebody that's never ridden a bicycle before, right? And so again, you know, similar tasks, but they are different, right? So again, for motor learning, often minutes, hours, and days. On timescales for motor development, it's often weeks, months, or years to get it down, right? So again, you can learn new skills, but to make it like to get those permanent changes that you're looking for, where it's not like you're having to relearn and relearn, it takes lots and lots of time, okay? And again, like I said, I can learn a new song. Like I could pick a song off the internet and learn it and sit here and listen to it and look at it and everything else and play it. But for my hands and mind to memorize it, make it where it's effortless and it just kind of like my hand, like everything does what it needs to do, so to speak, and have that motor development, it's going to take a lot longer than me just playing for like an hour or so. Okay. Developmental motor learning history. It's typically studied. It is typically studied from an information processing perspective. Children and youth or older adults are compared with young adults on the same motor tasks. Fitz and Posner stages of motor learning. There's a cognitive stage where the learner has to get the idea of the movement. So, you know, they're really highly processing as they do it, right? They're going to make errors. And again, each time they do it, they may over adjust and make a new error. They're going to be very inconsistent, right? Once they get to associative, the learner begins to refine these movements. The attentional demands lessen. So they're not thinking through every aspect of it. Again, when I've taught, especially like Olympic lifting to newbie Olympic lifters, they overthink every little thing, and they have to, because it's a foreign movement to them. Same thing when I've worked in sports and I've taught, baseball skills and basketball skills or football skills. Like you teach somebody to throw a football for the first time, especially somebody that doesn't really have a lot of throwing background. They don't have a good baseball throw or anything like that, and you take them to throw football, or vice versa. Teach them baseball throwing, they've never really developed the whole lower body upper body congruency. There's a lot to learn, right? And there's a lot of errors and over errors, and like that. Once they get one thing fixed, something new comes up, right? And so they have to start refining these movements, just keep practicing, sometimes compartments, and then getting the compartments fixed, and then adding 2 compartments together, then 3 compartments together. Again, their attentional demands will lessen the more they do it. And then the errors are less variable, and the learner begins to correct them as they do them, right? They can feel something was off when they did it, rather than did that. They may have to look in a mirror when they do something. They're like, oh, I did this again. Eventually their body will be like, oh yeah, you dropped your shoulder, you did this, you did that, you were on the back of your heels, you should have been on your, like on the balls of your feet, whatever it is. And then it becomes autonomous, where there's little attention required to execute the movement. So again, you think about like throwing a ball. Little kids have to think a lot, and then the more they do it, and they start to develop this pattern. And then once they have a good motion, eventually you can just, like, you'll throw them a ball, and they'll catch it and think about it before they throw it back. Eventually they just react, they catch it and throw it back, right? And so then at that point, they can really focus on game situations or the environment, because they're not thinking about the mechanics of what they're doing. Bernstein stages of motor learning, there's the freezing degrees of freedom. Learner minimizes movement. They lock some joints, and again, these kind of parallel each other, right? So again, they'll be very robotic in what they do, right? And they may learn again in segments. Then they start to release more degrees of freedom. They show more fluid movements. It's not so robotic, and so like they do like lower body first, and it's really robotic, and then the trunk, and then the arms as they try to release. Everything becomes more coordinated, and it starts to look like one fluid motion. And then exploiting degrees of freedom, the learner exploits reactive forces and passive dynamics. So they learn to use the mechanical advantages given to them in different positions as they go through things, and coordinating their muscles, so it creates an ongoing transfer of energy, and so on and so forth, right? Practice and motor learning. Practice schedules can have a number of characteristics: constant practice versus varied practice, blocked practice versus random practice. And again, these things you may have to use each one of these with different learners at different times where they are in their field of learning. And again, sometimes they will develop bad habits, and sometimes you have to do some of the blocked or random things to get rid of that, or varied versus constant. Sometimes you want to do the constant, like once they get in a rhythm of doing something right, just like, all right, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. And then you want to see if they can do it under different circumstances. So then you vary, like instead of throwing the ball where they always catch it in the same spot and throw it back, you start throwing the ball high, low, left, right, and see if they can adjust to make the correct throws, right? Sometimes you're going to have them do block stuff. So again, you may have them just, work on their shoulder motion and not use their legs, right? Or they, you have them emphasize, these different things versus these other things. They just do like one thing over and over, or you're going to have them do some randomized controls or randomized practice, right? So practitioners can be the parents, teachers, coaches, therapists, teammates. You know, can sometimes, like you may work with your teammates on things, right? Constant versus varied. Constant practice repeats the same conditions. Varied practice will use different things like distance, size, weight, etc. Varied practices for adults is thought to develop stronger schemas, sets of rules or relationships, which may benefit learning of new tasks. Again, usually with more advanced folks, you can vary more. When they're brand new folks, it's not always the best idea. Variable practice in children. Variable practice schedules have benefited children. Not all degrees of variability have been superior. Variability of practice might be better strategy for learners in the associate stage. So again, when you've too much variability at the beginning, they don't learn the task. Again, if you're always doing the same thing over and over, especially with children, they get bored and lose they lose their focus and attention. So again, there's that mix of, at the beginning, a lot of times you're going to do very focused, do the same stuff over and over, but you can only do it for so long depending on how old they are, right? Once you start to lose them, you just got to let them go, okay? And then you do it again as they develop and they get in the next stage. Then you add variability, and you can maybe even practice longer, because now you can add new games or new whatever to keep their attention, right, and keep them going, okay? Augmented feedback in motor learning. Intrinsic feedback comes from the body's internal sensory, like something feels right, something feels wrong. You know, they can, you know, they may feel like they did something awkward, or they did something that, you know, just felt right. Okay. Extrinsic or augmented feedback comes from the external supplementary source. Now again, it could be from a person telling them, hey, you did this right, you did this wrong. We can use sensory things. We can use, you know, there's certain things that will, you know, like, if you do something wrong, it will not let your body continue in that motion. And, you know, like there's different gizmos and gadgets depending on if it's like a golf swing or a throwing motion or a baseball swing. You name it, there's all kinds of gadgets out there that help you to develop a good mechanical movement, right? And again, this will, it's in addition to the intrinsic feedback. You can refer to the result of the movement, knowledge of the results, and it can refer to how the movement was executed, right? Was it, again, you can use different mechanisms that block people from doing things incorrectly. If they do it incorrectly, they'll hit, you know, like their hands or elbows on, you know, whatever it is, okay? So both KR and KP will enhance motor learning, right? KP might have an edge when motor skills is being acquired. Children may benefit from more feedback for longer periods compared with the adults, and more research is needed with older adults. Again, we don't bother with the older adults with a lot of this stuff, where in fact it'd be really interesting to see what's going on, especially if we can take somebody that, you know, they're highly functioning in a movement, and if we can kind of test them every few years and see what changes, right, as they get older. Processing speeds. The faster information is processed, the sooner a response can be decided. Children take longer to process information. Simple reaction time decreases from 3 years to adolescence. Slower processing speed is related to central processes within the central nervous system rather than peripheral. So again, same thing, like, you know, like I can take my 3-year-old and I can throw a ball to him, and he'll, you know, like he's got to get his hands ready. Then he catches in it, takes him a while to like really secure the ball. And then he's got to really think about throwing the ball back. My 6-year-old, I can throw it. He definitely, you know, his hands don't have to quite be ready. He can, you know, during the time I toss it to him slowly, he can get them ready. And again, his throwing time's not quick, but it's quicker than the 3-year-old. And then my 11-year-old, she can do things much quicker, right? So again, we see that change, right? And again, central processes will include your attention, memory, and response selection, right? So processing speed of older adults will slow. So again, we see it, you know, they go from slow to fast when they get to, you know, the more they do something one, and then as they get older, and then you get into like middle adulthood and they're at top speed, or, you know, like in their 20s and stuff. And then as they get older, it starts to change again, right? So changes in older adulthood are also in central processing, and the older adult learns a new task more slowly, but they maintain skills learned early in life. Speed of response selection. So this 82 study varied compatibility on reaction time tasks. The compatible, if a light on the if the light on the right came on, the right response key was to be pressed, and similarly with the left. Incompatible, if the light on the right came on, the left response key was to be pressed, and vice versa. 6 and 10-year-olds were not as fast in the incompatible situations as adults were. Again, I've been doing a lot of cognitive research stuff when we use some similar type of response things. Central processes in older adults. Older adults benefit from warning signals. They're more easily distracted, and they're at a disadvantage in a series of rapid decisions. Processing speed changes, simple reaction time slows, choice reaction time slows, movement slows, accuracy is not affected as much as speed. Okay. So active versus inactive older adults. Active older adults are more like young adults on simple and choice reaction time tests than inactive adults. 2003 study conducted, that's probably the most, that's probably the closest study I've seen listed in this book to present time. And everything's from the 60s, 70s, and 80s in this book, you know. But they conducted a meta-analysis. Fitness training improved a variety of cognitive tasks. Aerobic plus strength training was best, as were longer interventions. I'm actually getting ready to do a kind of a similar cognitive study here, looking at different modes of exercise. Brain imaging techniques documents the benefit of exercise. So again, control exercise groups, combined strength and aerobic, and then aerobic training alone. So you can see when they're doing both, they see a greater cognitive function, right? In their tasks that they can perform. Memory, giving children prior information about an event improved the recall of the event. Memory capacity is hard to study because it is related to prior knowledge about a topic, and people of all ages remember better when there's motivation for the remembering, right? So summary and synthesis, learning occurs in stages. Motor skill capability changes through practice. Practice schedules can vary in their characteristics. Augmented feedback can benefit motor learning. Characteristics of the learner can impact motor learning, and speed of processing information improves through childhood and adolescence, but it will slow as we become older adults, right? Especially if we're more sedentary. Again, nothing good comes from being inactive. Let's just put it that way. All right. Quick little chapter, but we'll go over it again live. So if you have any questions, just let me know. And that's it.